Story 1. Got shot in the abdomen during a house invasion. Was bleeding out. And the only thing that kept me alive was focusing on my breathing and my buddy smacking me across the face and telling me, "Nobody dies from a shot to the stomach." Obviously lying to me, but it helped keep me focused. And I guess the doctors too when I made it to the hospital. Story 2. Worked as a bouncer and had a few drunkards who got violent. I got very good at dodging thrown bottles. One day, I received the usual call to come and give someone the walk of shame. I grabbed his shoulder and started walking him out. And before I realized something had happened, he stabbed me in the thigh and was about to go for my throat before he got hit with a glass by a patron. A few stitches and a funny walk for a few weeks and I was fine. But that guy always got free drinks. His only problem with hitting the dude was, well, now I've got no beer. That's a bit sad. Story 3. When I was 7 years old, I was locked in a dog kennel by my mom's boyfriend's kids. They barely fit me into the kennel and took it out to the above-ground pool, pretending they were going to drop it. They ended up doing just that, and I was underwater in seconds. The plate at the bottom of the kennel made it hard for them to pull it back out, so they had to turn it on its side and then pull it out. They didn't bother setting me down. They just dropped me. I remember the feeling of my hands crammed through the holes in the kennel with grass between them. I heard some arguing and what I assume was fighting. The older brother came to my rescue and let me out. I slept in his room for the rest of the summer until I went home to my dad's. Story 4. Not sure if I was nearly murdered, but someone threatened me with a knife, probably trying to rob me. However, at that point, I was on the phone with my dad because my mom had an accident and completely ignored the guy. I think he just let me go because he realized how stressed I was. Story 5. I got stabbed in the chest a few years ago during a fight with some bicycle thieves. I didn't notice at the time and escaped the fight and rode the bicycle away. Then I checked myself and discovered lots of blood. I went to a nearby shop and sat down inside, put my finger in the hole, and called the ambulance. I had a punctured lung and blood in the pleural cavity, but I was otherwise okay. The person who did it went to prison. Story 6. Ex-wife tried to hit me with a car 3 times. I would be walking on the street, and she would come roaring out of parking lots. It was evident she would pull into the parking spaces and stay hidden for a length of time before coming at me. She hit me twice. The first time I went to the hospital and the second time was minor. Story 7. When I was 16, my friends and I were out in the woods with a .22 rifle, some cans, and zombie targets. I finished my little magazine and handed the rifle to a buddy. I went out to set up the cans and targets again, and a shot whizzed past my left ear within 2 inches. I walked up to him, grabbed the rifle, and punched him straight in the face. He was ostracized from the group not long after that. Story 8. My ex-boyfriend was abusive the entire time we were together, but it culminated in him trying to strangle me with an electric cord. Our elderly neighbor randomly knocked on our door because she needed help shoveling her driveway, right as I was starting to lose consciousness. He was a police officer, so he had an appearance to keep up and immediately switched his mask back to answer and go help her. I found out later when my ex left for his overnight shift that she had long suspected something bad was happening because she would see me with bruises and got a bad feeling out of nowhere that night, and that is why she came over to ask for help. She called her son to take me to the hospital, and that was when I was finally able to leave him. I will always consider her my guardian angel. Side note for anyone reading this: if a partner ever makes you feel unsafe, leave. Make a safety plan and get out. They will always do it again, and it will always get worse. Edit. Wow. Thank you for all the awards and kind responses. If you relate to this experience, I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart and hope you were safe. For further context, I was 16 years old, and he was 26. I had been kicked out of my house, and he swept in and saved me. I thought I would be safe from my abusive family situation with a police officer. This situation was indeed reported by emergency room staff as I was a minor and did eventually give his name. This happened in a small township where the whole department were his co-workers. Many charges were technically filed, but he was never actually arrested, and everything was dropped after alibis were provided by his co-workers and a general cover-up was done. I made a post on a domestic violence sub about the situation a while ago that included snippets of some of the reports as proof, but it blew up, and I deleted it out of fear that he'd somehow find it. I was granted a short restraining order basically as a shut-up measure, but he would still have other officers bother me around town and harass me with fake numbers so nothing could ever be directly linked to him. Then, the second it expired, he began physically stalking me again. It has been many years. I have since moved over halfway across the country, changed my legal name, and changed my number at least a dozen times. If you were to look my name up online, it's like I don't exist. He still will pop up occasionally with random letters or spam texts from fake numbers as a little "hey, I'm still here and watching you." I guess it doesn't affect me much anymore. As crazy as that may sound, you become numb to it. I've basically had to accept that he will probably never fully leave me alone. The moral of the story is again, leave and don't look back. No matter what gender you and the abuser are, no matter what ages, no matter how bad the abuse is, no matter what. Story 9. I was coming home from my restaurant job at around 2 a.m. I stopped at a sketchy Walgreens to grab some snacks. I was getting into my car when a man ran up behind me yelling, "My friend! My friend! Please, you must help me." Startled, I turned and saw a large man in front of me. He had a thick Haitian accent. He started frantically explaining that he had just arrived from Haiti and desperately needed a ride to his friend's house to reunite with his family. For your information, the giant earthquake in Haiti had just happened. Normally, I try to help everyone I can, but this man was giving me weird vibes, like he was on a lot of drugs. I politely declined, and he got aggressive. So I ended up just hopping into my car and driving away quickly. The next morning, I saw on the news that he had convinced two young girls to give him a ride. He pulled out a knife and forced them to drive about 100 miles away. He then made them park on a side road somewhere and started stabbing them. One died and the other ran away and got help. He got shot by the police while trying to get away. Story 10. I was 21. It was a murder-suicide attempt. He drove me into a river at 2 a.m. on a below-freezing night about 30 miles from town. I was asleep in the passenger seat and woke up when the water hit my legs. The doors wouldn't open due to the pressure, but luckily the windows were down. We swam out and I dragged him to shore. He lay on the riverbank and cried while incoherently apologizing. I led us through the woods for hours until we found a farmhouse. I was mostly fine but had hypothermia and a torn anterior cruciate ligament. I told him to kill himself as soon as possible and leave me out of it. Then I never spoke to him again. We were not together, nor had we ever been. We were just friends and former roommates. I'll never understand why he wanted to take me with him. Story 11. When I was 23, I was robbed at gunpoint by a guy who was about my age, maybe a bit younger. I disassociated immediately after the encounter, so my memories of the event are sort of in the third person and weird. But I remember he asked me if I had any valuables that he hadn't already taken while he was pointing the gun in my face. I told him he could check my pockets. He briefly got this look of shame on his face and let me go. I guess pointing a gun is impersonal, but reaching into a woman's front and back pockets felt wrongly intimate and crossed a boundary for him. For what it's worth, the only valuables he got were $14, an almost 3-year-old Android phone, and a third-generation Kindle. Story 12. I was kidnapped, beaten, and had a gun held to my head while in the vehicle. I just agreed with everything he said, apologized for who knows what, and promised to do whatever he said and to not call the police. He let me out of the car at my workplace, and I immediately went in and called the police. I felt stupid for years afterward, but now I realize whatever I did to live through that was the correct thing to do at the time. Story 13. A father killed his wife, then came to the school looking to kill his son. The staff convinced him his son was not there after he threatened to kill everyone in my class. He was caught in Indiana on his way to kill his parents. He was schizophrenic, could not afford his medicine anymore, and had an episode where he thought the world was ending, so he was going to kill his family so they would not suffer. Him holding a knife at someone's grandmother's throat while yelling, "I'll kill them all, they are already dead," was extremely terrifying to a class of 7-year-olds. Story 14. My ex-wife was behind the wheel of her car with the door open. I was standing between her and the door trying to talk to her. She reversed hard out of the parking lot, and the door knocked me back. She then floored it straight at me as I was trying to get up. My only recourse was to jump on the hood. I got my fingers on one hand in the hood lip by the windshield and hung on for dear life. I got thrown off and hit my back and head against the curb when she went around a curve in the apartment complex. She ran before she got tracked down by the security officers on the base where we worked. I don't know how fast she was going, probably not more than 15 to 25 miles per hour, but don't let the action movies fool you. Jumping on a hood is neither easy nor fun. It's terrifying. Story 15. My partner tried to strangle me. I was already seeing black and a few stars in the black universe on my way to death. Then the police rang the doorbell and he stopped. The neighbor, an 11 to 13-year-old boy, called the police. He had his room directly at the house close by and could see through the window. He saved my life and the life of my unborn baby. Story 16. When I was an early teenager, I went to a friend's house whose older sister was having a party. It had alcohol, but very limited. Her parents were home and we mostly played video games and cards. But more people than expected showed up, including some people who had already graduated. This one guy was a former high school athlete who started making fun of me and hitting on me. The parents asked him to leave and he did, making a bit of a fuss but eventually walking out. I was all upset and crying and wanted to go home, but home was about a mile walk through some woods and dark roads. So her parents told me they would drive me home in a bit when the party was over. I was still upset and I was very foolish, so after a bit, I snuck out and walked home. A few hundred yards from my house, someone hit me with something. I was told it was a baseball bat and stabbed me in the stomach several times. I do not remember any of this, nor do I remember someone finding me bleeding in a ditch and taking me to a hospital. If I had been there for much more time, I probably would have bled out and died in a ditch. Story 17. When I was a kid, my little brother had a mild obsession with knives, to the point where he collected them under his pillow. Once, for reasons I've forgotten since, he got mad at me and stabbed me in the back, literally with a seam ripper. Had he used any of the knives under his pillow, I would be dead now. This situation escalated significantly. Story 18. Got held up while working nights at a gas station. I'm assuming I didn't almost get murdered because he could have easily killed me if he wanted. We were 2 feet away from each other, and he had a .38 caliber revolver pointed at my chest. He was older and looked like he was used to armed robbery. Story 19. I was essentially a functional light drug addict when I was a teenager. An acquaintance and I were held against our will, and she didn't make it. I did, and it took 3 days. It was a normal day. I went out with a friend and 2 acquaintances to a relatively normal house, but our drinking water was drugged. We ended up at the other friend's house. I realized once we got inside that there were no doorknobs, the windows were nailed shut, and so on. Phones and clothes were taken. The other girl was far more gone and already working the streets, so they'd take her out and bring her back. I was beaten up pretty badly, drugged out of my mind, and I stopped fighting back. They didn't take me out of the house except to lock me in a shed sometimes. I pretended to be more drugged than I really was and listened to what the guys talked about. It was about where to leave our bodies. One day, she and the other 2 were out doing what she did, and the guy watching the house and me fell asleep. He'd been strung out for days and had just failed at a suicide attempt in front of me, so it was a deep sleep. They hadn't locked me in the shed that day, but left me in the main house as I'd become compliant and learned to act more drugged than I really was. I got my phone out from under the guy, since they were trying to make it look like I left of my own accord, throwing off friends and family. Charged it for 10 minutes while I found someone else's clothes and shoes, and ripped out most of my fingernails getting a window open. I ran until I couldn't breathe and called for help. And I got clean. Over a decade ago. The other girl was never seen again. Story 20. A person approached me with a knife in Seattle while I was parking a work truck behind our shop. He wanted my cheap work gloves. At least that's what I deduced from the broken language. Another person appeared out of nowhere and talked the first person down. I gave him my gloves anyway since it was cold and walked calmly back to my shop. I had a box of about 100, and I would have given them to him without involving the knife. Georgetown used to be a rough place. I guess it's gentrified now. Story 21. Almost stabbed in Columbus. My friend was so high and did not know what was going on and just grabbed the dude by the shoulders and moved him aside. The knife guy did not know how to respond. Later, I saw him get tossed and arrested. Story 22. When I was around 10 years old, my abusive father decided I needed to learn how to swim. He just threw me into the lake. I was struggling and he did nothing. I lost consciousness and almost drowned. A random adult man saved me from drowning. My father twisted the story to make it seem like he lost me out of his sight when I clearly remember him standing nearby, watching as I sank down. I'm still scared of deep water. I'm almost 30, and I can't swim. I never tried again after that experience.